Israel Adesanya is at a crossroads, and UFC 305 will tell us what the future of his career will be. Because there's only two directions his career can go. At UFC 305 against Dricus du Plessis, he can go this way and go down the wrong road, or he can go this way and go down the right road. UFC 305 will either be the start of something new or the beginning of the end for Israel Adesanya. Now I'm going to start with the doom and gloom. I'm going to start with the wrong turn, and then I'll end this video with the right turn. So let's start with the wrong turn. What will be the wrong turn for Israel Adesanya's career is if he goes down the path that Tyron Woodley went down. Right now, Israel Adesanya is on that same path that Tyron Woodley was on. And eventually his career ended and he became this guy who at one point in time was the champion, defended the belt several times, and then lost the belt and then just never could get his groove back. Never let his hands go, never brought the aggression, never brought any action, never brought what made him a champion, and never got himself back into a position because he no longer was the guy that he once was. Right now, Israel Adesanya is on that path. His last fight against Sean Strickland was terrible. Nobody can dispute that. It was a horrible performance. His career at this point in time, with a few exceptions that we'll get into, with a few exceptions, his career at this moment perfectly matches Tyron Woodley's career. Tyron Woodley, when he fought and defeated Darren Till, that was probably the best performance of his career. For sure, it was his best performance in the UFC. Maybe you could argue the Robbie Lawler fight when he won the title was his best performance, but since the Lawler fight, without a doubt, his best performance was against Darren Till. Israel Adesanya, you could argue his best performance might have been against Robert Whittaker. There's some fights during his career that could be considered the best win of his career, but a lot of people will tell you the fourth fight overall, the second fight in the UFC against Alex Pereira, was the best win of Israel Adesanya's career. So Adesanya has this great performance against Pereira, and Tyron Woodley has this great performance against Darren Till. Now we move forward in the story, and the fight that everyone wants to see is Tyron Woodley versus Colby Covington. And on the flip side, the fight that everyone wants to see is Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. Because of timing, because of injuries, because of the way all things have played out, neither one of those fights is the next fight we get. So here we have Woodley and Adesanya. They come off these great wins. Woodley was in a very bad place leading up to the Till fight. He had some performances against Damian Maia and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, which were nothing to write home about. And he lost a lot of fans, or he wasn't attracting many fans, depending on how you want to look at it, because of some of the things he did and some of the performances he had. He just wasn't in a good spot. Same thing with Israel Adesanya. He had just lost to Alex Pereira, and some of his performances as champion against guys like Jared Cannonier, the second fight against Marvin Vettori, the second fight against Robert Whittaker, the fight against Yoel Romero, which is considered to be one of the worst title fights, if not the worst title fight, especially on the men's side. You could argue Rose Namajunas versus Carla Esparza is the worst title fight in UFC history, but Yoel Romero versus Israel Adesanya is not far behind. Definitely on the men's side of things, that's the worst title fight in UFC history. So Adesanya was losing ground, and Woodley had lost ground, was losing ground, however you want to put it. And then they go in and they have these great performances. Adesanya regains the title by beating Pereira, and everything's great, and he's back on top. And then Woodley beats Darren Till and silences all the critics, all the people who were complaining about him, So they're in the same place. Now, what happened to Woodley was he got matched up with Kamaru Usman, someone who he wasn't really motivated to fight. He tried to build the fight up. Hey, I'm a D1 wrestler. You're a D2 wrestler. I should beat you. All this nonsense. He tried to build the fight up. Same thing with Israel Adesanya. He doesn't get matched up with Dricus du Plessis. Just like Woodley didn't get matched up with Colby Covington. He gets matched up instead with Sean Strickland when Dricus du Plessis goes down with an injury. So I'm doing a side-by-side comparison here to show you exactly how these two guys are on the same path right now. So Adesanya tries to build the fight with Strickland, but he's not motivated, just like Woodley wasn't motivated to fight Usman. The guy he's motivated to fight, Woodley, is Covington. The guy he's motivated to fight on Adesanya's side is du Plessis. So he's not getting that fight, and he goes in there and completely lays an egg. And you can go with Woodley or Adesanya. The shoe fits on both of these guys. They both went in there and did nothing. Adesanya offered Strickland no resistance, and Strickland did whatever he wanted to do. And Woodley offered Kamaru Usman no resistance and let him do whatever he wanted to do in that fight. Now, it gets a little bit different because it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, because Adesanya is going from fighting Strickland to fighting du Plessis. Woodley went from fighting Kamaru Usman to fighting Gilbert Burns, then to fighting Colby Covington. So it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, but you kind of get what I'm going for here. So Woodley shows no signs of being able to salvage his career. He goes in and fights against Gilbert Burns, and it's nothing special, and he loses the fight. He offers no resistance, same as the fight with Kamaru Usman, and he loses that fight. So then he fights Colby Covington. Now, he's supposed to be extra motivated to fight Colby Covington, and he's supposed to be doing everything in his power so he can make this guy who's talked a bunch of trash about him and has made him very angry. He's supposed to go in there and smash this guy and make him eat his words for everything that he said. And he goes in there and he does nothing. He gets this rib injury. The fight was boring. No one remembers it. It's neither one of them. I mean, Colby Covington, his performance was nothing to write home about, and Woodley did less. So Israel Adesanya is now in the same position that Woodley was in for the Colby Covington fight. Adesanya doesn't like the things that du Plessis has said. He's in the same position as Woodley when he fought against Colby Covington. So if Israel Adesanya goes out there and has the type of performance that Tyron Woodley had against Colby Covington, that will make it very obvious to everyone watching that Israel Adesanya has chosen to become the new Woodley. He'll be the new Tyron Woodley, a guy who was champion, but we're about to witness his downfall. He'll probably continue to fight, but he won't be getting another title shot. He won't be a contender. He'll be someone who's just going to be fighting guys who are highly ranked and probably going to lose to them and have this long losing streak and leave the sport on a long losing streak, just like Woodley. That's the first path that Israel Adesanya can go down. If he fights Dricus du Plessis at UFC 305 and lays an egg, just like he did against Sean Strickland, we'll know that that Sean Strickland fight was not a fluke. He didn't show up in that Strickland fight because he says he lacked motivation. If you're lacking motivation now for this fight, a fight that's been built up over a long period of time against a guy you don't like, if you can't get motivated to fight Dricus du Plessis, you can't get motivated to fight anybody. Just like Tyron Woodley. If he can't get motivated to fight against Colby Covington, he can't get motivated to fight against anybody. And we've seen what happened to him during his career. After he lost to Colby Covington, he was submitted by Vicente Luque. And in the second Jake Paul fight, he was brutally KO'd. And on top of that, he's fighting Jake Paul. If he's still top of the food chain in the UFC, he's not fighting Jake Paul in some kind of freak show, sideshow, influencer boxing type event. He's fighting in the UFC welterweight division. So Tyron Woodley, his career went completely south, And if Israel Adesanya does what he did against Sean Strickland in this fight, we'll know that his career is over. And I just want to make one thing clear. It's not exactly the outcome of the fight. He could go in there and fight a war with Dricus du Plessis and lose a split decision. I'm talking about if Israel Adesanya goes in there and just stares at him like he did against Sean Strickland, or even though it was a win, the fight against Yoel Romero. If he just goes in there and just stands there and watches Dricus du Plessis move around the octagon like he did against Yoel Romero, we'll know that he's not motivated. We'll know that we can't get this guy motivated moving forward. We'll know that his career is going to follow Tyron Woodley. We'll know he's the new Woodley. If Israel Adesanya goes in there and does what he did against Sean Strickland, he's probably getting finished. Because I think Dricus du Plessis is going to push the action more than Sean Strickland did. I think du Plessis is going to try to really go for the finish. Strickland, he was a little bit too cautious, if that's even a critique I can say of the fight. I mean, he fought a good fight. I'm not critiquing him really, but there were times in that fight that he could have went for the kill and was patient. He was a little bit too patient. He fought a little bit too smart. Du Plessis is going to go in there and try to make it ugly. So if Adesanya offers no resistance, du Plessis is going to take it and run with it. And if Adesanya can't make this a war or can't get the finish, we'll know that his career is going the way of Tyron Woodley's. So that's the first direction his career can go in. He can take the wrong turn and end up like Tyron Woodley and be the new Woodley. Adesanya is at a crossroads, and right now he would really have to make a sharp turn to get on the right road, because right now he's headed towards the wrong path. He's headed towards being the new Woodley. There's time, of course, for him to turn things around and get back on the right path. But as of right now, his GPS is telling him, hey, you're going to be the new Woodley. Woodley is your destination. Right now, things are trending that way. Now, I'm going to tell you the correct path, and if he is victorious over Dricus du Plessis at UFC 305, he'll follow that path, and it'll lead him to bigger and better things, and all will be well in the life of Israel Adesanya. So, the first path, the wrong path, is the new Woodley. The correct path, the good path, the path that everyone wants him to be on who's a fan of this guy, is the old Izzy. So he can either be the new Woodley or he can be the old Izzy. Now, I'm not talking about him not growing as a fighter, him not growing as a person. I'm just saying, let's get him back to where he was when he defeated Alex Pereira. Get him back to the level of popularity and status within the sport when he was champion and before he fought against Sean Strickland. Now, if he beats Dricus du Plessis and gets on this right path, number one, the UFC has very high hopes for him still. Go watch all of the Dana White interviews where people ask him about Alex Pereira. Immediately, he mentions Israel Adesanya. Go and watch all those interviews where people ask him about Pereira. Hey, how did this guy become a two-division champion in such a short period of time? How did this guy become the biggest star in the sport in such a short period of time? And he immediately mentions, well, what about Izzy? How about Izzy? He didn't have a long career in the UFC and then finally become champion. He was on the path to a title shot the minute he showed up in the UFC. He was on that fast track towards the title shot immediately. Within 16 months, he had the interim belt or something like that. Dana White will say all these great things about Israel Adesanya. He won't allow people to only mention Pereira. He has to remind people, hey, Israel Adesanya is still a star in this sport. He's still a big draw in this sport, and we still have high hopes for him within our company. So if he's able to defeat Dricus du Plessis, he'll be right back on that path to stardom. He's taken a hit, and his popularity has dipped a little bit, but he can get right back to that level. If he goes in there and puts Dricus du Plessis to sleep, no one will even remember that Sean Strickland fight until he gets matched up against Sean Strickland, which we're being told the winner of this fight will fight Sean Strickland. So if you go down the right path and go down the old Izzy path, the UFC has two plans for this guy. One is definitely 100% out in the open, and the other one is kind of being talked about behind closed doors. It's not something that right now is even possible. It's something that once we cross that bridge, we'll get to it. So the first plan for Adesanya in the UFC is, okay, he beats Dricus du Plessis at UFC 305. He gets matched up against Sean Strickland. He gets revenge on Sean Strickland by beating him. Then they match him up against Khamzat Chimaev, which will be a very highly anticipated fight. And they're all highly anticipated fights, even this du Plessis fight. Everyone will want to see a Strickland-Adesanya 2 if Adesanya defeats du Plessis. Everyone will want to see Khamzat Chimaev if he's able to get past Robert Whittaker and Adesanya is able to get past Sean Strickland. A lot of people within the UFC, within the MMA community, believes that who's ever got the middleweight title, Adesanya, Strickland, du Plessis, whoever, they're just keeping the belt warm for Khamzat Chimaev. A lot of people really believe in that guy. So if he's able to get by Robert Whittaker and get matched up with Adesanya, that'll be a massive fight. And if Adesanya can beat him, the next logical step to match Adesanya up with would be Bo Nickel. Now that sounds very strange to be saying Bo Nickel, a guy who is still unproven, is still a young fighter in this sport. He doesn't have that many fights, but we're talking a long time before we get to that fight. We don't know how these fights are going to play out. We don't know who's going to get injured. We don't know what's going to happen. Does Whittaker beat Chimaev, which changes a lot of things? We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen Saturday night. We don't know what's going to happen in any of these fights. So we don't know that if, okay, let's say Adesanya beats du Plessis, he beats Strickland, Whittaker beats Khamzat Chimaev, and then they do a rematch with du Plessis. We don't know how any of these fights are going to play out. So who knows what is going to happen with Bo Nickel. But if all things go the way this plan has been laid out to go, Bo Nickel will be the guy. He'll be the final boss for Adesanya to fight. If this is a video game, the last guy will be Bo Nickel. And then Adesanya can just ride off into the sunset. So that's why the UFC still has high hopes for this guy. Because a win over Adesanya for Khamzat Chimaev or Bo Nickel would turn those guys into bigger names than they already are. A win against Adesanya means a lot. So that's the first plan. And there's a lot of money. These are high stakes fights. These are fights that are going to do very well on pay-per-view. So Adesanya, if he goes down this path by beating Dricus du Plessis, is going to make a lot more money than he's already making. And he's made a lot of money up until this point anyways. And he's always talking about legacy. This path, without a doubt, he'll have to be considered one of the greatest mixed martial arts fighters of all time, and he'll definitely be the number one middleweight in the history of this sport. If he's able to beat Dricus du Plessis, if he's able to get revenge on Sean Strickland, if he's able to fight Khamzat Chimaev and beat Chimaev and then fight Bo Nickel and beat Bo Nickel, he would have done something that Anderson Silva never did, which is beat the guys of the previous generation, beat the guys of his generation, and beat the guys of the new generation. Adesanya has the opportunities to be viewed like John Jones. John Jones cleaned out the old guard, his generation, and then the new up-and-coming guys. He was about to, and then he left. The fight against Dominic Reyes was supposed to be his introduction to the new guard, but then he left the division and whatever. So, but Adesanya, with the opportunities that have been presented to him, fighting guys like Chimaev and Bo Nickel, who are a part of the new wave of fighters based off of when they got into the sport, he'll be able to do something that not very many people in the history of this game have done. And it's something that the guy who's considered to be the greatest fighter in the history of this weight class, Anderson Silva, never did. So that will definitely put him, he'll really be number one and push Anderson Silva down a peg if he's able to do this. And this is a guy who's always talking about legacy and staying motivated. This path that has been laid out for him by the UFC, if he does take this turn, which is the turn to go on the road and become the old Izzy, this is what legacies are made of. If you want a legacy in the sport, doing this, going down this road is the way to do it. Then there's another path that we could get to this either with an Adesanya loss, or maybe if he somehow doesn't get matched up with Nickel or Chimaev, there's this outside chance that, all right, he beats Dricus du Plessis and then he fights Sean Strickland, he beats Strickland. Then he fights a trilogy fight within MMA, the 5th overall fight, with Alex Pereira at light heavyweight, and he beats Alex Pereira. There's an outside chance that the big super fight will be a fight that people wanted to see many, many years ago, but now it'll finally happen, which is him fighting against Jon Jones. That might be something that's in the works. Okay, let's have Adesanya get the middleweight title back. Let's have him get revenge on Sean Strickland. Then let's have him move up a weight class and settle the score with Alex Pereira. And then, well, he's going to be a 2-division simultaneous champion if he does that. And he's got heat with Jon Jones. And Jon Jones views Adesanya as someone that he has something to gain from fighting and defeating him. And he also views him as easy money. Jon Jones looks at Adesanya and goes, I can get this guy to the ground. I can feed him elbows the same way I fed Brandon Vera, Vladimir Matsashenko, even though it was a DQ, Matt Hamill, get him to the ground and just smash him. That's a fight that it's way out in left field. So many things have to go right for that fight to take place. Timing has to be perfect. The stars have to align for that fight to happen. But I'm sure there's people in the UFC front office, Dana White included, that are thinking about, wouldn't it be great if Jon Jones fought against Israel Adesanya? These are big fights. Tom Aspinall, Alex Pereira, these are great fights for Jon Jones. But, the real big fight, the fight we really want to see, is Adesanya versus Jon Jones. I'm sure that's being talked about in the UFC front office. The only proof I have that that might be the case is that they keep bringing up Adesanya whenever Alex Pereira is being brought up. So that might be something in the future we see. But that only happens if he beats Dricus du Plessis. A loss to Dricus du Plessis doesn't necessarily mean the end of his career. The way he loses to Dricus du Plessis will determine if he becomes the new Woodley. Him beating Dricus du Plessis, regardless of how he does it, he wins a boring decision. He knocks out du Plessis. He fights a war and barely wins a split decision. It could go either way. We got to see this fight again. This was an epic war. This is an instant classic. Regardless of how he beats du Plessis, a win is a win. And that'll get him back on the path to where he needs to go, which is to become the old Izzy. So Israel Adesanya right now is at a crossroads. He can pick to go down the old Izzy path, or he can pick to go down the new Woodley path. He's put so much pressure on himself to defeat Dricus du Plessis at UFC 305 that can equally work perfectly with him or perfectly against him. If he defeats Dricus du Plessis, he can really sell that and completely shoot right back up the top of the charts, and he can get right back to the spot he was at when he defeated Alex Pereira, because he's put all this pressure on himself. The stakes are so high for him to win this fight that if he were to win the fight, even the biggest Israel Adesanya haters will have to respect and acknowledge what he just did. But the same thing can work against him. It goes both ways. He puts so much pressure on himself, he'll be a walking meme. He'll become Tyron Woodley, hence why I used him as the example. I mean, the shocking similarities between Woodley's career and Adesanya's career at this stage in the game are striking. It's crazy. But he'll become a walking meme within this community. If he shows no signs of life, if he shows that he doesn't have it anymore, if he offers no resistance in this loss, he can somehow salvage his career if he were to lose an exciting fight and fight a war against Dricus du Plessis and just comes up short. He can maybe change weight classes and try to fight Pereira for a third time. He can go up to 205. He can maybe do what Robert Whittaker did, and he can go back down the rankings and fight 2 or 3 times in non-title fights and try to work his way back up to a rematch. There are ways for him to salvage his career, but it's based on the performance. If he goes and lays an egg, he's going to be the new Woodley. If he fights a war and comes up short, he can still salvage his career. Change a weight class, drop down in the rankings like I mentioned earlier. That's all possible. A win for Adesanya puts him right back to where he was when he fought against Alex Pereira the second time in the UFC, the 4th time overall, and he knocked him out. He can get back to that level. Then, of course, the narrative will change because now he's got to go out and beat Sean Strickland. He's got to prove that that was a fluke the first time. In this fight, he still has to prove something similar to that. He has to prove that that wasn't him in the Strickland fight against Du Plessis. But then against Strickland, he has to prove that Strickland doesn't have his number. These are massive fights for him. So going down that path and being successful going down the road of Old Izzy will allow him to be the big star that the UFC thought he was always going to be. The UFC's been looking for the next Conor McGregor since Conor McGregor fought against Floyd Mayweather and took so much time out and then came back and lost to Khabib. The UFC's been looking for the next big star. They identified the right guy to be that star, and that guy had a lot of fans. It's just that some of his performances weren't that great, and then he lost a few fights that he shouldn't have lost. That really hurt him. But he can get back to that level by defeating Dricus Du Plessis and becoming the 3rd fighter in the history of the UFC to become a 3-time champion in a weight class. John Jones did it at 205, and Randy Couture did it at heavyweight. If Adesanya can go in there, beat Du Plessis, get the belt back, get revenge on Sean Strickland, and then fight and defeat both Khamzat Chimaev and Bo Nickel, he would have done something that no one has really ever done in this sport. Even now, if he just beats Du Plessis on Saturday night, the way he's won 3 titles is he's been the champion, fallen off, came back, won the title, fallen off again, and if he beats Du Plessis, he'll be back on top again. So he's in a different class than Couture and John Jones. They had outside issues, which were the reasons why they were 3-time champions. Adesanya has been the guy who has had to rebuild a few times. He had to do soul searching when he lost to Alex Pereira. Hey, how's this guy beating me all these times? I should have beat him in the first fight when we fought in kickboxing, but it was a controversial decision. Then the second fight, I was beating him, and then he caught me and knocked me out. How did that happen? Then in this fight, the 3rd fight, the first time they fought in the UFC, he beats me again. How did that happen? I was winning that fight. Had that fight gone to the judges' scorecards, without a doubt, at bare minimum, I would have won 3 rounds to 2. Possibly 4 rounds to 1. But I got finished. How did that happen? So he had to do soul searching, and everyone's mocking him. Everyone's laughing at this guy. Hey, Alex Pereira's got your number. You can't beat this guy. Beat you in kickboxing, beat you in MMA. This guy's got your number. And he goes out in the rematch, which would be the 4th fight, the second time he fought in the UFC, and he goes out there and he knocks out Alex Pereira. Then he loses the fight to Sean Strickland, and here he is now having to do exactly what he did against Pereira. He's having to answer questions. Is it a motivation issue? Is it just people have figured him out? What is it? We're going to find out on Saturday night. And depending on the performance, we can go one of 2 ways. Old Izzy or New Woodley.